Okay.
Hola, buen día a todos. Muchas gracias por acompañarnos en nuestra tercera
Good
sesión.
morning. Thank you for accompanying us in our third session of the cycle of webinars for the art market on the occasion of the 50th anniversary of our convention about protecting art. The Montevideo office, along with the Heritage Office of Uruguay. We're happy to have you here at this last but not least meeting. My name is Maria Frick. I'm in charge of the culture program here, and I'd like to give you some housekeeping tips for this meeting, which will last for about an hour. At the bottom, you have the interpretation option to listen in English or Spanish to the presentations. It's important once you choose one to stay there. If you choose off, you listen in the original language. This will be transmitted, broadcast live on YouTube, on our channel, and then we're going to also publish the files in both English and Spanish translated. So you can visit them and check them anytime. Tuesday's visit had the number of visits, and we had 100 yesterday. So we're happy to have done something that has hundreds of people interested. Now we'd like to continue with some of the topics that we've been discussing in the previous days. We talked about the due diligence principle, and I think this is something that we're going to get back to from different angles. I'd like to introduce Enrique Machado, my co-host for the day. He's a member of the Heritage Commission for our nation and works in trafficking control and also dealing with Mercosur. Good morning to everybody. Welcome to this last session of the webinars. I hope that we get visited as much as the two previous days. And we're going to be able to exchange and gather Uruguay experiences. It's a long road to go. It's very rich. And I think that we begin learning from the examples that were set. We mentioned Willie Ray, the president of the commission. He had another commitment today, so he said to say hello. Thank you, Enrique. Now I'd like to give the floor to my colleague Fabiana Duarte, the focal point for Latin America of the convention that should be adopted to prohibit exportation and transfer of illicit cultural goods. We call it the Commission of 1970. Fabiana will be talking about the role of the art market in preventing illicit trafficking in works of art. We would have liked to hear her the first day. She couldn't make it the day before yesterday. But we think it's a good opportunity for her to help us close out some of the topics we've discussed. Thank you, Maria. And for all the people in Argentina, Uruguay, Latin America, and people here in Europe, I'd like to thank Enrique and Maria and the Cultural Heritage Commission of our nation for this major cycle of webinars. It's interesting to be everywhere in the world for UNESCO, and also for such an important topic, which is the art market. This is one of our partners that without them, we can't continue in fighting against the illicit trafficking in cultural goods. Thank you also to the other participants who've been here yesterday and the day before yesterday and are still here with us today. So I'm going to share my screen.
Ay, creo que ya lo
¿Lo pueden ver?
I believe you can see it.
Estupendo, muchas gracias. Bueno, como lo comentó María,
As Maria was saying, I'm the focal point here in Paris in the Secretariat of the Commission of 1970 about the measures that should be adopted to prohibit and prevent importing, exporting, and transferring illicit ownership of cultural goods. So it's important to see what the main topics of this convention are, because we talked about the fighting against the illicit trafficking, and sometimes we don't talk so much about exporting and importing and ownership transfer, which is something which concerns the public and the art market. As we know, this convention of 1970 was the first international instrument regarding cultural good illicit traffic. It's an important period of peace. Since 1970, we're protecting cultural goods in armed conflicts, and so now there's a total of 6 conventions for protecting cultural goods in armed conflicts in 1954, which we've already mentioned, the Convention of 1970, which we have the party states here, and the 2001 Convention on Underwater Convention, and stolen and illicitly exported goods, UNIDROIT, and which has 48 party states. The full 1970 UNIDROIT Convention, it's important. We're working, both UNESCO and UNIDROIT are working harder to try to get this ratified more. Uruguay is a party to the Commission of the 1970s, since 1970, in the Latin American Caribbean region that has 33 member states of UNESCO. 34 are parties. That is 73% of our countries. We're missing, especially in the Caribbean, and we're working, of course, when a convention is adopted, the legislation has to be adapted to the legal framework. The 1970 Convention has 3 main provisions: the preventive measures, the restitution, and international cooperation. This convention focuses on these 3 areas. The main provisions for preventive measures are to prepare laws and regulations to prevent illicit trafficking, to establish inventories. One of the things that this convention is asking for, to have control over archaeological digs, the adoption of codes and ethical principles, work on education, and also to prevent institutions from receiving cultural goods illegally exported, asking the governments to get exportation certificates and to create agencies for cultural goods protection with the police force as well, to control and monitor antique dealers to see where their goods come from, who is the owner, and when they sell, who they sell to. So there's the whole chain of each item. And also it's important for states to adopt sanctions that are compatible with their national laws when there's a crime against cultural goods. In restitution, the convention covers the goods that are inventoried, those that are stolen from a museum, from a civil or public religious monument. It admits the claims of the legitimate owner. Since UNESCO is intergovernmental, this is done diplomatically. So one state asks another state to return the item, and they ask above all to facilitate recovery. for return and recognize the right of the state to declare that cultural goods are inalienable. It's important to note that the application of the convention, of all conventions in general, are not retroactively enforceable. Uruguay has been the party since 1970, France since 1997. If I have something in France in the 80s or in the 70s, we're not going to say that officially it's not protected by the laws, by the French legislation, because there wasn't something to implement the convention. But this doesn't mean that there's approval or legitimation of illicit trafficking prior to the enactment of the convention. And it doesn't mean approval or legitimation of any illicit trafficking or any the UNESCO Intergovernmental Commission. I'm going to talk about that more. International cooperation, UNESCO encourages the governments to cooperate with the cooperation with bilateral agreements, multilateral agreements, prohibiting importation among states of items that are declared important. I'll give you a couple examples now. One between Uruguay and Argentina, which was in 2018, the restitution of the painting of Saint Catalina by Bartolome Murillo, which was like $1.5 million, had been stolen from the museum in Rosario, Argentina in 1983. After an anonymous denouncement by an Argentine citizen, they said it was in Montevideo, in Uruguay, and in an operation between the Cultural Heritage Department of the Federal Police, working jointly with the Special Crimes Department of fighting organized crime in Montevideo. They recovered this painting and gave it back to the museum in December 2018. Another example is the Mayan stonework in Paris. And it was in the catalog photograph of the item that was for sale. And on the left, we have a photograph from 1900 in the Stewart and Graham book, where they talked about different Mayan stelas that had been stolen from Guatemala. When it came up for sale in Paris, Guatemala told us, and UNESCO contacted the auctioneer, told about the theft, so it immediately was removed from the catalog. It was not sold. It couldn't be resold after it was revealed. It was with a collector since for decades before the convention existed in Guatemala, and the owner are discussing returning because of indemnity. It's still in process. So what does UNESCO do? We do training activities, courses, international meetings. We recently had a meeting in Peru called Afro-Cusco, a regional meeting involving 20 countries from the region. We also had in Berlin in 2020, fighting against illicit trafficking, open to the public. Also on the internet, we do everything on internet now that there's times of the pandemic. And so we're looking for ways to continue working with the illicit trafficking, because we know that with the pandemic, customs and police forces and so on have to be watching merchandise and medical materials. And so they may be not giving such importance to cultural goods. On the anniversary, 50th anniversary of the convention, we have a sensitization campaign about art and devastation of history and identity of peoples using cultural goods. This is a picture of an item from Peru that was illegally excavated. It got onto the international market. We found it in Argentina, and we used it there as an example of how illicit trafficking doesn't have borders, the true price of art. So member states and member states to the convention have to update their legislation and public policies to suspend auctions. We have developed tools, which I'll tell you about, and cooperation with our partners. We don't work alone. It's very important. All the partners that we have internationally and regionally, we also work a lot with UNIDROIT, with the International Customs Organization, Interpol, and all of these partners. We can work on this important topic. I'd like to tell you quickly about UNIDROIT Convention, about stolen or illegally exported cultural goods, which is a very important convention because it complements the 1970 convention. In the 80s, we knew that there were some gaps, some parts missing in the convention. So we tried to get a new convention that would solve those problems. So the new convention is the private law convention, while UNESCO is working among states and working among the ambassadors. This one can involve any person can demand the restoration of a good. So all items that have been stolen or exported illicitly are covered by this convention. So if an item has been illegally dug and it's on the international market, it's considered stolen and should be given back. There are 48 ratifications. Uruguay is currently not a party, and I hope that they will join soon to complement the 1970 convention. We get to the Intergovernmental Committee for Promoting the Return of Cultural Goods to the countries of origin or the restitution in the case of illicit seizure. We call it the ICP-ASRP, the Committee of 1978. This committee was created because, as I said, it's not retroactive. We needed a committee or an agency, a consultative body to discuss and encourage discussion about the goods that were not protected by the 1970 convention. So things that were purchased or acquired during the colonial period or by countries that were not yet parties to the convention. This is a consultative body and a forum for negotiation. It does not act judicially for controversies among the member states or associate members of UNESCO. So we act as mediators for restitution and return of cultural goods that have been illegally appropriated. The committee develops tools to help states not only continue fighting against illicit trafficking, we have to know that there's activities to prevent trafficking, but also to get the goods returned. Mediation and reconciliation reinforce the process of returning cultural goods. Harmonious, equitable resolution of conflicts to complement the committee's work, not to interfere with other actions. It's a measure, but it's not mandatory. We have to activate, and like in any mediation and reconciliation, the other state has to agree to continue with it. There's regulations to know how to perform this mechanism. If you're interested, it's on the convention's website. There's the model for certification of export by UNESCO and by the World Customs Organization. For those states that didn't have that and wanted to update theirs, this is a basic model. Anyone can complement that with whatever they think is necessary for their territory. Another important UNESCO tool is the database of national laws to protect cultural heritage. There are now over 3,000 freely available laws from 179 countries, which are useful for researchers and for the art market. If there's any doubt whether an item could have been exported from a country, we can say, no, from this country, we can't export, we don't know how it got out. Well, let's not put it on the market. And for police forces, for the customs authorities that have some doubt about the origin, whether something can be re-exported or not, they can access this database of national laws. The ethics code of UNESCO for merchants of cultural goods. Another important tool is the basic actions concerning the cultural goods offered on internet, which UNESCO is doing with Interpol, which calls for on the next slide, I'll talk about this because we talk about internet sales. We're also working with our partners, such as the database on restoration, Artemis, by the University of Geneva. We heard yesterday from this area. They've developed this database from UNESCO. They've done the promotion, and we've just translated 100 cases from English to French, which is now available in the database. And I have to mention the red list of ICOM, the endangered goods that are on the market. The red list are not stolen goods, but goods that are endangered and are on the market, can be found on the market in collectors' possession. There are 15 lists. Latin America has the most. There's 6 lists. In Central America and Mexico, Colombian goods, Dominican goods, Haitian goods, Peruvian, and there's one for Latin American goods, which is complex from a number of countries. So we mentioned the basic actions regarding cultural goods that are offered on the internet. UNESCO, with the different sales platforms, is encouraged to include on the sales pages that buyers should be paying attention to the origin and making sure that it's a legal item. To prove and check the verify the origin of the object and evidence of legal exportation and also legal importation. So buyers have to demand evidence of legal ownership from the owners, checking with the national authorities of the country of origin or Interpol and UNESCO ICOM. These platforms are intermediaries. They don't have these items. It's always important to ask the seller to make sure that this is legal ownership. The International Ethics Code of UNESCO for cultural item merchants is inspired on the UNESCO Convention of 1970 and in UNIDROIT from 95, also based on a number of national codes for business persons and for the international, the SINOR organization. This is based on the model rule on the policy of purchasing for museums from ICOM, which tries to have different ethics codes put together into one to sensitize and have a tool for the art market. Why do we need a code like this? The motivation of the code was to harmonize these existing laws about acquisition of cultural goods and provide a harmonized version, bringing together from numerous codes, national codes on illegal trafficking. We're going to try to avoid problems that some provisions existing in some similar codes that we've already come across, and create a more coherent structure for international coherence for the business persons that have adopted them. It also facilitates the buyer in good faith to prove that they have done their due diligence and they're not trying to find something illegal. We have to know that a voluntary code not imposed by legislation, UNESCO is working with the member countries so that they can apply in their territory. I'll talk about this a little bit later on. The main objectives of this code are a systematic application which would interfere with the appearance and falsifying of stolen goods that appear on national art markets. We have to create an obstacle for illegal marketing of trafficked goods. This reduces the demand and indicates to governments so that they can show that they're willing to adopt new standards. So governments can adopt policies for export that could reduce the demand for cultural goods that are illegally exported. The advantages for collectors would be that the code gives collectors the opportunity to encourage legal marketing so that business persons can be above all suspicion and to show the government that their collections are above all doubts, that they've done everything they could to determine legal origin. So nobody will be disguising themselves as business persons, but without verifying the origin of their objectives when they're not deliberately insisting on legal purchases. This way, the ethics code provides collectors, responsible art collectors, the people we trust, so that the public and the media can trust them. For the public, compliance with the code by business persons show that they're a responsible community, not to be confused with people who are favoring theft or clandestine illicit exportations of cultural goods, which have to show that there's a legal market and an illegal market. The code shows that a coalition of international organizations governmental authorities from the countries of origin and museums, administrators of heritage, culture professionals, and business persons are making real efforts to fight trafficking in cultural goods. As I mentioned, the application by member states have translated this, have published it, and broadcast among all interested professionals. They're enforcing this at the national level. And the translations we have available in English, French, Spanish, Russian, Arabic, and Chinese, the official languages of Unesco. And at the link you can find in these languages, but was also translated to Portuguese, Finnish, Swedish, Hungarian, and Italian. And a number of member states have published the text on their national authorities' websites. I'm put some articles. I'd like to read the important ones so you have an idea of how this code addresses issues. Article 1. Professional dealers in cultural goods will not import or export or transfer ownership when they have reasonable reason to doubt that it might be stolen, illegally transferred from clandestine digs, or illegally exported. Article 3, the business person who has reasonable reason to believe that it might come from clandestine digs or has been illegally or dishonestly purchased from authorized excavations or from alignment will not participate in any transactions about this object, except there's an agreement with the country that has the site or monument. So when the country tries to get it restored in a reasonable time, they will take all actions permitted by the law to collaborate in restoration of this item to the country of origin. The code has 8 articles. I won't read them all to you, but I'd like to invite you to look at our website. It's very important to know that the ethics code targets the art market. It refers not only to illegal importation and exportation, but also the transfer of these items, because often there are countries where exportation is illegal, but within the importing country, they can do that illegally. So it's important for dealers to pay attention to make sure that they're not selling or making a transfer of ownership of an illegal item. So I'd like to thank you for your time, for your attention. You have my email. I'm at your service for any question, or also after this talk if you have anything you'd like to ask me, or later on by email.
Muchas gracias, Fabiana. Muchísimas gracias. Creo que fue súper claro y te agradezco los énfasis.
Thank you, Fabiana. That was very clear. Thank you for underscoring
Para este ciclo de webinarios en particular.
the emphases that you gave for the cycle of webinars. I think there'll be a lot of questions. You can ask your questions by chat, the chat box, or there's a question and answer area at the bottom. I'd like to introduce you to Mora Garat. Mrs. Garat is supervisor of the prevention of fraud and the illicit market. She's going to talk about opportunities for collaborating in fighting online trafficking in cultural goods. Thank you, Mora, for letting us start this work with you on this topic. Well, thank you, Maria. First of all, Maria, Enrique, and all of UNESCO, I'd like to thank you for giving me the opportunity to be here. And as Fabiana was saying in her presentation, this public private partnership is fundamental with online trafficking. So I'd like to first of all give you an overview of what our sites are involved in, the free market, how the ecosystem is put together, and also show you some specific cases that we've detected of cultural goods preventively, and to tell you a little bit more detail about collaboration, especially with Interpol. So I'd like to begin with the presentation.
Bien. ¿Están viendo ahí? Bárbaro.
Can you see? Let's begin with the general numbers so you have an idea. We comprise e-commerce, which is an ecosystem which has 18 countries with different platforms where users can operate. I'm glossing over the numbers because the detail is not relevant specifically, but it's important to look at the positioning that we have in e-commerce regarding compared to the big dogs. We're positioned on number 10 worldwide in e-com sites. This is the transaction volume, purchases per second, which shows the use of our platform for different elements, buying, selling, and transactions in general. Another platform we have very strongly is the platform for payments, for democratizing money, for credit cards, cash income, cash flow. This supports e-com on the marketplace that we've been working with. This is also to give you an idea about the volume in millions of users that we're working with regionally. Our team has been working with fraud to investigate strategically for our company. In this regard, I'll share with you that what we consider our mission in this ecosystem that I was telling you about. Our mission as a team is to be part of the fraud prevention team. There's about 500 of us in different countries, in Brazil, Colombia, Uruguay, and Argentina. We're all working together to detect proactively, automatically, effectively about any possible situations of fraud. So our team has the mission of acting proactively with consciousness raising, identification, and repression of internal and external fraud. So we feel it's very important when we identify to show external fraud, to present this to the judicial authorities. Also in this connection, we support the authorities in each region where we are active. In this case, we're the main focus of collaboration with Interpol and Unesco in supporting cultural goods. So we are governed by these principles. Investigative methodology, where we try to see what happened, how it happened, and to support the authorities in depth, in greater focus, not just reporting, but to give a value added to the line of research, the specific patterns, so that the external investigator team can do the work they have to do to identify the subject or the investigations committing the crime. In this regard, regionally, so far this year, we've identified 314 publications. Here's some numbers to have an idea of what we've identified in Mexico, Argentina, Chile, and Uruguay. These publications, to make this clear, were not being viewed, they were detected by our artificial intelligence team. They're automatically detected, as I said. The platform has a volume of 16 purchases per second. It would be impossible for humans to watch all of this, all the posts on the platform. So artificial intelligence and our equipment for fraud protection is fundamental for this type of detection. In these publications that we've restricted, there are different kinds of articles. I'd like to show you some of them that may be interested. So we have in Mexico publications that we've identified and restricted. In this regard, these were proactive detections. We're not experts, but in these cases, our detection tools identified that there was the possibility of something illegal. So these posts were not published actively, but we only kept them in our records restricted. In the case that we're talking about and other exposition, when you have a post that is complained, that is reported, there are certain detection rules that are activated and the neuronal network so that these publications cannot come back online. This is proactive, it's useful. So everybody should know that when a publication is identified for any reason legally in cultural goods, that it can be denounced on the platform, which activates all the fraud prevention alarms. These are publications we identified in Mexico. There's some that we found that could be illicit, that were restricted, they weren't active in the platform. In this case, these were mentions real dinosaur bones. These exist and were published, referring to real dinosaur bones with these photographs that they attempted to publish. The same thing happened with the arrowheads and spearheads. We also share with you, we have these, all of these detections were from this year with the old stones that had been perforated and the fossils, also in Chile. We also have publications from Colombia that have been detected, and publications of arrowheads and spearheads by the indigenous in Uruguay. So, obviously, in these publications, these publications were restricted using the collaboration of Interpol and everything involving cultural goods when there is doubt about the origin. In this sense, we're working strongly for relations and learning on our part as well, because obviously you're the specialists in this topic, to be able to learn and for us to train our neuronal networks to identify more accurately and assertively for this kind of publications. We're interested in working with the community. The effort of our company is to collaborate with all the units that we collaborate with and to learn. Clearly, we don't want this sort of crime to perpetrate on our platform. We believe and are sure that the relations that we have will enable all parties to be more successful in our investigation. On this point, I wanted to share with you that in the last quarter, we worked strongly with Interpol in Argentina, and we had 3 cases of collaboration that are currently being investigated. And so this is a sample of what we can do working together as a team throughout the region. In this case, for example, for us, this was an opportunity to learn so much because it was publication. It was presented as a souvenir. Clearly, you'd identify in the picture, you could identify and presume that it wasn't really a souvenir. There were certain things there that you can't do intuitively. But the expert and the person that knows would say, no, this is not a souvenir. This is heritage, cultural heritage. This is an archaeological fossil. There are different situations where we learn to identify this sort of disguising things to publish them. And so they will not be restricted. We identified that we restricted their publications and they're trying to find, clearly, they're trying to find a way to get around our rules so we can strengthen our linkages and relationships to collaborate strongly, actively with Interpol and Unesco and to contribute internally so that we can also learn and be part of that partnership, as Fabiana was saying, where we collaborate with the private and public authority. That's what I wanted to share because of our commitment with the free market to collaborate throughout the region, to be there in your day-to-day work, everything you need, and to be parted to the conventions and legal structures suited to each region and country, and to collaborate with investigations with all the investigative units in the region. Thank you, Mora. I'd like to thank you and the whole team of MercadoLibre because since the first time we contacted you some months ago, we've also always noticed your openness to these different languages, different organizations, but the fact that you're here today with us is an important step forward. And a dialogue that we can carry out through our networks. I'm sure there will be questions. I see one. Now we're going to do like previous days. Everybody will ask you to give you the opportunity to ask your own question by yourself. By Tatiana in Havana, a question from Mora. Do you do any follow-up on things that are for sale, such as auctions? So Tatiana, would you like to complement your question?
No sé, María, si querés que conteste directamente en vivo o le contesto.
Sí, en vivo. Creo que
Would you like me to answer live? We have plenty of time. Go ahead. Tatiana, if you would like to adjust your question that you asked in the chat. Yes, good morning. Thank you to everybody. Thank you to Fabiana for this excellent presentation by both of you. I wanted to ask if you also work in tracking public sales and auctions from the different art dealers who make sales, where we need to track them through their catalogs and records and comparing the Interpol database and what about what there is and what's published in the catalogs for sale. Is this something that's within the realm of your work? To get straight to the point, regarding the publications that there are, what we have the artificial intelligence networks according to certain terms. Those terms have to do with any crime that we see that is not following the company's terms and conditions. That doesn't mean that we monitor specifically auctioneers' house or auctions in general. What we do in these cases is we collaborate with any Interpol investigation of any publication. We're not the entity that monitors, we're not the public agency. We do restrict our publications and our users who don't meet the terms and conditions that MercadoLibre has.
A ti.
Mora, te voy a hacer voy a aprovechar yo.
Mora, I'd like to ask you a question. Could you please explain to us the way that you collaborate, because you sign agreements with the different governments? This enables you to accelerate exchange of information. So can you tell us about how you find a solution that doesn't require major agreements, but there are smaller scale agreements that streamline procedures? Yes, thank you, Maria. In this regard, we have a framework agreement that we've made with a number of organizations, mainly the authorities in the Latin American region, with the intention of collaborating it closely with the investigation unit that I'm telling you about. So there's the context of legal security where we have the possibility to collaborate more tightly, more closely, with active participation in the investigation. So our collaboration is often in duration that takes all week, supporting the investigation team to be able to find the people who are being investigated. This is not just collaboration of emails back and forth, but in some cases, we work much more closely together, collaborating closely with the investigative unit, all under the framework of agreements that are made with the different organizations that are interested, that we obviously want to collaborate with. Thank you, Mora. I think that was a good point to discuss for people who are interested in making agreements with you. For Mora Garat from Marcel Suarez. Marcel, would you like to ask your own question? Marcel, would you like to ask your own question? I'll read it. I think Marcel has asked, how does free market interact with the authorities for illegal trafficking of cultural goods when you have a suspicious case? I think that's the question that you've just answered. What would you like to tell us anything more about that? I'd like to remind you about what I mentioned recently about publications. Let's not forget that we users, citizens, can all denounce a publication. This is part of the investigation area. We have to take this into account because we look very closely at that indicator when a publication is reported by a user for different reasons. People report things for different reasons. So this comes under the rules of free market. The people analyze this in depth, these complaints, these reports. Aside from the authorities' investigation, we work very closely with Interpol because of its regional scope, of course. There are local investigation units that can also refer research to us. But we would like you to have it clear that we, citizens, can all participate and denounce these publications that have something illegal. I'd like to remind you that there's this option of free market that we work very strongly
Sí, quizás
with
otro
the public.
punto que, retomando también lo que decía
Another
Fabiana
thing, getting back to what Fabiana
en
just
una de nuestras
said,
primeras
that
conversaciones
in
hablamos
one
de
of
no
our
se
first
puede poner un
conversations,
disclaimer, no se puede poner
then
un
you
aviso al comprador y una de
can
las
tell the
problemáticas que hemos
buyer
visto,
one
y lo menciono porque
issue that
capaz que
we've
les
seen,
interesa,
and I
es
mention
que
this because it may
justamente
be
es tan amplia
relevant,
la variedad de bienes
that
culturales
there's such a
que es
range of
básico
cultural
poder
goods that it's almost
pensar en todas las
impossible to think
categorías
that
que
all
pueden realizar
categories
el comercio en MercadoLibre o en
of
otras plataformas
free
sin
market
poner
commerce
una advertencia de este tipo.
that we could
Sí
put
se
a
puede,
warning
por
of this
ejemplo,
type.
en el caso de los
We do
automóviles,
put,
¿verdad?
for example, in the case of
Sí,
automobiles, you were telling me about that.
sería muy difícil en
That
este
would be very
caso
difficult in this
impedir, por
case
ejemplo, que no
to
apareciera el
prevent, for
anuncio
example, for it
de
not to appear as a souvenir. So in this regard, I wanted to give you this visibility because we feel that it's important to have an expert opinion. It clearly happens that they're finding workarounds, sometimes very creative, to publish without being caught. For example, as pretending to be souvenirs. This is restricted, but at the beginning they tried to publish items as that are stolen or fossils or archaeological items as souvenirs.
Enrique.
Enrique,
¿Gustaría hacer algún comentario?
would you like to make a comment? Yes. Well, very interesting presentation. Both. I think it's important to see how we can pull together coordinating governments and companies because of internet sales. We're in the 21st century, and so probably we'd have to expand that coordination, public-private partnership, for more efficient combating. So, if there's no more questions, I'd just like to thank both speakers, which have the two different levels, which interact and will have to continue to work together. So thank you so much for our two speakers on behalf of the Uruguay Cultural Heritage Commission. Enrique, we're showing this complementarity. Fabiana wants to ask Mora a question. So we're ready for a last question. Thank you, Fabiana. Thank you, Maria. And to Mora, my question is, it's a twofold question. We're working with this platform with the social networks against illicit trafficking. We'd like to know. We talked about artificial intelligence for detection, an application or something that you have developed. I'd like to congratulate you for doing something proactive.
Sabemos que hay
we know that there are platforms or social networks that are not proactive, that wait for the complaint to come into action. So when the ad goes away, everything disappears. So we ask for proof of the crime. So I'd like to know about the application that you're using for this. We're talking about blockchain for this, to find illicitly exported items. So how long do you keep the records, because it's all data? So we need space and technology to keep all that information. There, I'd like to go on for another 2 minutes. I'll tell you a little bit about this. We have artificial intelligence that developed by MercadoLibre. We have the strong spirit of working preventively, preemptively. So we have to have the algorithms of the neuronal channels that learn day by day. So everything is a contribution. Everything you can teach us will make us better detectives. According to the information we have no limit now. We're collaborating with information that it could go from 2009 onward. They're very cautious with the keeping this information, but we do reports to the substantial reports to the authorities. So at least the feedback that we have in interaction with Interpol has always been positive in the volume and level of detail of information we can give. Along with what you're talking about with the blockchain, we can add this into the concept we have of the virtual chain. Everything is linked together. We can't look just at one part of the transaction, one part of the story. And it's a whole context that we have to have this concept in mind to also take action. I don't know if I've answered again. Yes, thank you, Mora. We've spoken for a number of months, but you have different levels of criminal activity and are working on the basis of the great experience that we have of major complex activities, many different areas. That's why I said we're not restricted to something specific of collaboration with the fugitive department of Interpol. We, the whole company, cross-references everything that happened, that our team works on all of this. This gives us a greater visibility to what happens just with a mere publication. So there are some more questions. There's a reflection by Marcel Suarez. I would like to, if you like, I think there are also questions by YouTube. If you like, we're going to send you this by email so that we can close things out today in a timely manner. For these 3 days in December, and we can do another 10 days in July. I'd like to thank you for your presence, your participation, the possibility of following so many points. This format doesn't allow us to go into greater depth into dialogue, but we've made notice, and there are points that we'll continue working on. So if you'd like, you can contact the UNESCO office whenever you feel is relevant. Thank you again. Happy New Year. And we'll see you again next year in the actions that we organize and convoke you to. Thank you again, Fabiana, for saying it's from UNESCO headquarters, and Mora for the panelists. And thank you, Enrique and William as well. Thank you for our partners from the National Commission. Thank you. Thank you, Tatiana, for accompanying us. Nice to see you, and hello to everybody.